And I'm going to share the screen. Okay. And this is a story by Shalom Ash. It says here Shalom Ash 1958. That's apparently when it was published. Shalom Ash died in 1957. So when exactly he wrote this story, it's part of a bigger account. But anyway, here it is. I thought it would be an appropriate selection for today. Tonight, we begin the observance of Yom HaAtzmaut, Israel Independence Day. The real date, the 5th day of Iyar, is on Shabbat, but the state of Israel, when that happens, they push it away so that everybody can celebrate without desecrating Shabbat. So it's going to be officially in Israel, it's Thursday.
Okay.
Because they'd also want to have a full day and not have Friday be cut short. So Wednesday night to Thursday is Yom HaAtzmaut's observance this year. Shalom Ash is was a very prominent writer. Some of you may have heard of a Broadway play that came out a couple of years ago called Indecent, and that was written to tell the story of the production of a play by Shalom Ash called God of Vengeance. Lynn, good to see you. So anyway, it was very controversial. He was a controversial writer. He got in trouble a number of times. He started out. He was born in Europe. In Eastern Europe, he came to Western Europe, then he came eventually to the United States. He went to Israel, he went back to Europe, he went to the United States, he went to Israel. He died in Israel. And this is a story that leads us into the, as I said, looking at Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel, is the title. So if somebody wants to please do us the honor, I'd like to have somebody read it. Who's going to do that? All right, Carney, go.
I lost my eyeglasses, so I have to hold this a little closer than usual. So.
All right.
But I'll be fine.
Carney, if it's too difficult, I'll even though
I'm fine. I'm just making
excuses. There you go. There, I made it a little bit bigger.
Yeah, that's good. Making excuses in advance. So, Eretz Israel. In the darkness of night, at the sea's edge in Israel, a small group of young men concealed themselves in the cleft of a ravine that gave on the Mediterranean. The heavy darkness lay like a great dead form upon the sea and on the shore. The sea was stormy, releasing its fury in high waves that beat upon rocks along the shore. The backlash wet the cold, shivering feet of the young people who waited there. The immigration center had made contact with a ship filled with survivors from German concentration camps that had managed to get through the English blockade and was nearing the shore of Eretz Israel. They had sent out an advance guard to a point along the shore that was hidden and protected by high rocky cliffs. From there, the land party would signal the ship's captain in code, instructing him where to land, and they would await the lifeboats filled with immigrants that would come from the ship. A little farther inland, hidden in a thick orange grove, there were trucks waiting for the immigrants, trucks with armed guards ready to distribute the newcomers among various villages in Israel. The young people on the beach had been specially trained for this work. Among them were first aid girls, whose equipment of medicines, blankets, and field cots lay hidden in the cleft of the ravine. They waited impatiently for the arrival of the lifeboats. Though they had purposely chosen this stormy night, they had not been prepared for the torrent of rain that came down upon them in full force. This would seriously interfere in their work. The fact that they themselves were soaked to the bone did not matter to them. Their real worry was for the blankets and the cots, which were wet through. These had been prepared for the sick among the immigrants so that they might be cared for as soon as they reached the shore. A light in the window of an isolated little house some distance inland guided the ship in its approach, but the disembarkment of the immigrants could take place only in lifeboats because of the perils of the rocky shore. The group on the beach was forbidden to use lights as signals. In the storm, it would be impossible for them to hear the sound of the oars, so they had no way to tell when the boats were approaching, for in the pitch dark night, it was impossible to see more than a few feet. There was no choice but to try to pierce the darkness somehow and to sharpen their ears in order to catch the signal of their lookout on the rocky point that projected into the sea. The lookout would try to direct the lifeboats to this landing place. They waited and listened for hours on end. It was already far into the night. The damp cold congealed the marrow in their bones, and they had no way to warm themselves. They were hungry for cigarettes, but did not dare strike a light. Most young people who had been born in this land, mostly young people who had been born in this land, they had only heard of the bitterness of exile without knowing its taste. They waited in silence. The only one who kept up a stream of talk from the very beginning of their watch was Lady Hadassah. She was called Hadassah because she was in charge of the first aid girls on these occasions. And she was called Lady because she was a mature woman who had been one of the head nurses of the Hadassah hospital. Also, she seemed to them all a kind of symbol of the Hadassah. Whenever anyone thought of that great institution, they thought also of Lady Hadassah. Actually, it was some time since she'd been a nurse in a hospital. But whenever there was a misfortune, an accident, whenever an ambulance was needed, there Lady Hadassah was to be found. She was a chubby, homey woman with a bright, motherly face, healthy red cheeks, and constantly smiling eyes. Young men said that one could tell she was an old maid, and there was a good deal of truth in this. There was something perennially healthy and serene in her face that was untouched by time, for as sometimes happens with the faces of elderly spinsters who live under the mantle of their dreams, time seemed to have no effect upon her. On the face of Lady Hadassah, too, there was the romantic radiance of idealism. If one did not look too closely to discover her age, one saw in her a young and energetic woman. Though there was no danger to which she would not expose herself, mostly she was to be found among the children of the youth Aliyah. She was possessed of an extraordinary patience, which somehow had its effect on children who could not be controlled or quieted by anyone else. Whenever there were difficulties with the youthful immigrants in the various colonies, she was called, and the magic of her motherly gift for harmony, she would straighten out the difficulties.
I just want to say a little detail. This name is Youth Aliyah,
Youth Aliyah.
not Youth Aliyah, like an Aliyah to the Torah, but Youth Aliyah. Aliyah is the Hebrew word for going up to Israel, as well as being called to the Torah, means going up. But because of Hebrew pronunciation, Israeli pronunciation, this was an Israeli institution, it was always called Youth Aliyah.
Aliyah.
And it was an effort to try to save Jewish children by bringing them to Israel. And it was a program that took kids, despite the fact that they were separated from their parents would give them up, or else maybe they were orphaned, and they were able to come to Israel and be taken care of in youth villages without, unfortunately, the benefit of their own parents raising them. So this was Youth Aliyah. So she was a kind of a mother figure for those young people. Because of her
gift?
Yeah.
Because of her gift with children, she was made the leader of a group of Hadassah nurses whose task was to receive illegal immigrants, take care of the children, quiet them after their upsetting experiences, and make them feel at home in Israel. She it was who accompanied the immigrants in their trucks and wagons to the villages. Yet she insisted on taking her place on the beach so as to be among the first to receive the newcomers. It was she who relieved the tired mothers of their crying children. On this dark night, she clambered over the jagged rocks, holding on against the heavy waves that might have washed her into the sea. Soaked through by the rain, she waited cheerfully with her comrades for the arrival of the little ships, keeping up a continual chatter and enlivening the spirits of the others with her talk. When we sit like this on the shore in darkness waiting for the newcomers, there's no way of telling what sort of people will emerge from the sea. Sometimes it seems to me that a little boat will appear out of the darkness of night, and from it will descend our fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to remain and live with us. A chuckle was heard from the youngsters about her. The older generation, they seem to say, the older generation and their romantic dreams. Why does it have to be Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? a young voice asked. Well, doesn't this sea remind you of the sea of Jewish sorrows with its stormy waves howling over our pain and suffering? Over martyrdom and pogroms? And it wouldn't be fitting that out of this roaring sea and this black night a ship should approach our shore, and that out of that ship should come our ancient patriarchs, returning to be with us as witnesses before the whole world that we are the true inheritors of this land that God promised us. Just imagine what sort of impression this would make upon the whole world, upon all of our enemies in the world, and upon our friends. An old maid's dream, one lad whispered to the other. Not only the dream of an old maid, but the dream of an old generation, of the old world from which she comes. The other one answered, oh, they all go about with these dreams. If we really must dream about a little boat coming to us out of the night, sent by heaven, then I know something better it might bring, something that will have more effect on our enemies. Well, what's that? Well, let our father Moses send us that magic rod of his, by the little boat that will come to our shore out of the night. This came from Ben Arya, the leader of the group, whom the English had more than once dropped by parachute behind the German lines into the Jewish ghettos, where he had organized resistance and partisan units. The rod of Moses? Some of them repeatedly, wonderingly. The rod that brought down the plagues of Pharaoh. We ought to have a rod like that for the new Pharaoh that spits out fire and dynamite and bombs. That's what the enemy will understand, someone added, in agreement with Ben Arya. Well, a rod has two ends. If it shoots fire out of one end, it might send bombs back out of the other. But if someone were really to drift towards us out of the night from among our people in exile, then I have a more important wish. Let the ship of Messiah himself come to us out of the darkness. Not only for us, but for the entire world, which is on the point of death and longing for salvation. A little boat that will bring us the sanctified spirit that we and the entire world are waiting for. Well, they all knew the voice of the Orthodox worker, Aronchik, who had been rescued from Hitler's hell by a series of miracles and wonders, and whose faith had not been weakened, but actually strengthened by all of the horrors through which he had passed. Since his recent arrival in Israel, he'd volunteered to serve among those who went into every sort of danger in order to rescue whomever they could from Europe and bring them to their motherland. Tonight, he had been sent on this mission, for it was thought that he would find others like himself among the immigrants, and because of their common experiences in the past, he would best be able to help them on their way to the new life.
So let's stop for a second. I just, again, want to point out, it was mentioned earlier in the story. Most of these young people have no experience of the exile. No, most of the people here, this is a generation that's born in Israel, the Sabras, born to people that themselves may have come from, countries far and wide, but they're the native born Israelis. And it's like, we've talked about this many times in other contexts. The immigrant generation then raises another generation that doesn't know anything about the past, doesn't know anything about what the parents had run away from or had to escape from. So this guy is old enough, the children that they're rescuing from Europe most of the time are too young, but this guy is old enough to have gone through everything in Europe and now be able to help out. So he's specifically chosen to be somebody who might be able to relate to the people that they're going to try to rescue this evening. So he's the one who says, I wish that the boat would be bringing the Mashiach.
All right. Another dreamer, his companions whispered among themselves. It's not to be wondered. He has nothing left but his faith. Hitler made a bachelor out of him, the leader said quietly to the others. He reminded them again to respect the religious sentiments of their comrade and not enter into disputes with him. And after this, the group became quiet. But soon after they fell silent, the voice of the lookout was heard. Ready, be ready. As though sparked into action, they all leaped up, and 4 young men, one after another, jumped onto the rocks into the sea, swimming through the angry waves. The others stood ready to catch the boat's line and drag it to shore. And then a tiny lifeboat appeared out of the stormy night. It was pulled and pushed by the youngsters who guided it between the rocks. Silently, with practiced hands, they flung the line to the outstretched hands of their comrades on shore, and all pulling in unison, dragged the little boat up onto the rocky beach. They stood as though turned into stone when, instead of a load of immigrants, they found only an aged, sick Jew lying on the bottom of the boat, and close to him, a crying child of about 3. "This is all they let down from the ship," said the Jewish sailor who was rowing the lifeboat. "The old man's nearly dead, so they had to get him ashore, and he wouldn't be separated from the child. Because of the storm, they're going to try another place along the shore where it'll be easier to land the rest of the immigrants. So better take him now. I'm afraid he might be dead by now." Lady Hadassah set to work. She set her ear against his chest. The old Jew was still alive. She could hear him gasping. "Eretz Israel?" he asked with his last strength. "Well, yes, you are in Eretz Israel," Lady Hadassah answered.
So also just let me note the pronunciation, since this is Hebrew, is Eretz Yisrael.
Eretz Israel.
Right.
"Yes, you are in Eretz Israel," Lady Hadassah answered. She tried to quiet him by bringing her flask of brandy to his lips, but the Jew's lips were closed. From between them, his feeble voice came. "Now I can die. Father in heaven, I'm thankful." "You will live and not die. Here, take this in your lips," Hadassah insisted. "I don't need anything anymore. All that I wanted was to bring the child into Eretz Israel and fulfill my vow to his mother." "Well, from where have you come?" "Do not ask. Take the child. I give him into your hands. I thank thee, Lord of the world, that thou hast permitted me to fulfill my vow." With that, the Jew closed his eyes and was silent. Lady Hadassah took the child in her arms and said, "Even so has our dream been fulfilled. A ship came, bringing our forefathers to our shore." "Not only her prayer, but mine, too, has been heard," remarked the Orthodox young man from Poland. "For the ship has brought Messiah to our shore." "Our forefathers? Messiah?" the young people repeated wonderingly. "Yes, our forefathers and Messiah. Don't you realize? Don't you understand? The past and the future lives in every child, the beginning and the end, our forefathers and the Messiah." "Is that what you mean? Come, comrade, we have work waiting for us," said the leader. They carried to the shore a dead Jew, and after him the living child.
So that's the story. Okay. So any comments, any insights, any remarks? Anybody want to say anything about this?
Well, it looks like we may have a Messiah.
Well, so how do you feel about that kind of way of identifying the Messiah?
Well, it makes me a little uneasy, I guess.
So when traditionally, when we have a bris for a baby boy, there's a special chair that is set aside. And that chair is called, anybody know? The chair of Elijah. Kisei Shel Eliyahu, the chair of Elijah the prophet. And why do we have this chair for Elijah? Because every baby who's born is a potential Messiah. Right? Every baby who comes into the world fresh, without all the baggage that we accumulate as we go on, but right at that moment, has the potential to redeem the world. So this is a definitely it's a short little story that tries to be very metaphorical about things, but yes, playing on that idea, that's the potential that this little baby exemplifies. And any other potential that's being thought about here, that's being sort of signaled? Yeah, Lynn.
This is, I know they're coming from the concentration camp, so this is after the war is over?
Yeah.
Yeah, so the new beginning after the horrible HaShoah, what is that the right word?
That's right. The Holocaust is called the Shoah in Hebrew. And the new beginning is where?
in the
Finish?
survivors, and especially in this new baby who is born
Where?
from that, but has the possibility.
What is the geographic location of this story?
Israel.
Eretz Yisrael.
Yeah.
That's the title of this little text. And this is the idea of what you weren't, tuned in yet. I mentioned that I chose this because tonight we begin observing Israel Independence Day.
Mm.
And this was early on, this was what Israel itself exemplified. Israel was this kind of newborn baby that had all of the thousands of years of history and heritage and pain all wrapped around it. And yet it was a newborn baby with fully, new, fresh, energies and possibilities. So this little baby that's being brought in the story is really just a kind of an image of the land of Israel as it's now being taken by the new generation of Jews to try to become a Jewish homeland. Yeah, Carol.
It's interesting that the only identity we know is that the old man promised the baby's mother. So we have no idea what relationship the man is to the baby, and the assumption is, since of the way they were coming, which was how Jews came to Israel before, when it was still Palestine, and they had to come in under the radar. We have no idea. We're assuming that the mother possibly died in a concentration camp or died shortly thereafter. But that's an assumption that they are part of the DP camps and came in that way. But it's just very generic but it's interesting that there's no relation. They don't give you a relationship between the man and the baby.
Right. Oh, that's an important point. So there's no indication. Is this the baby's grandfather, uncle, or a total stranger?
Yeah.
Who might have just been close with this woman at her dying days, who had this little child, and who then made a promise, I'll take care of your child for you. Right? We have no idea. The story doesn't give us any of that kind of, kinship relations or history. And that's also very important for as part of the story. On the one hand, there's a sense of so much history, right? And on the other hand, there are real gaps in terms of the specifics of what's going on with any particular person that's coming into the country. What's this kid's name? What are the names of this kid's parents? Like you said, this old man, where did he come from? What's his connection? We have no idea. And that means that everything starts from scratch, right?
It's interesting that his theme says Lady Hadassah and Youth Aliyah. And I had the feeling that he picked up a lot of the themes of the Hadassah organization, which got its start back in the time after the Holocaust. Because if you've ever heard Arden Epstein talk about how Hadassah, how they would collect things and syrup, and very quietly in the middle of the night take them to Bloomfield so that items could be shipped to Israel. And reading a book, I don't remember the name of it, was about Deanna London's father, similar at how they were Ben Gurion and everybody came to raise money, and how things were done very sub rosa, surreptitiously, because they didn't want to draw attention to themselves.
Right. It's mentioned in the book. In this story, the British are still not letting the Jews into Palestine, right? It's not yet 1948, the declaration of the Jewish independent state. And this is still British mandatory territory. They are the rulers of this territory, and they've made a rule not to let Jews in. There was a very small, tiny quota that was legal, and all of these people were illegal, despite the fact that they were running away from the camps. They were running away from the total devastation of their own families, of their own lives. that didn't mean anything. That the British calculation was that it wasn't a good idea to bring too many Jews into the land of Israel at that moment. And the whole Zionist resistance was against that kind of policy. Yeah, Carol.
Question. The British were limiting immigration, but they knew this was happening because they would try to come and stop it. They had to know that they had to be aware, they had to see that the population of Israel of Palestine was increasing. How did they did they try to find the illegal immigrants?
Yes, of course. And there was a whole industry of fake papers and of hiding people in different places so that they wouldn't, what's a family with 10 children, so now they have 11 children. It's there were zillions of ways to try to fool the British, and many people were caught and were deported. Hundreds of thousands of refugees were stuck in Cyprus in another camp. They lived through the concentration camps, and then they were caught by the British trying to get into Israel, and they were held in a barbed wire enclosed concentration camp, in the sense of concentration, no packed together, and they were held there for years until the state of Israel was created, and they were able to be brought into the new state. So yeah, the British were very serious about enforcing this, and that was part of the whole tension at the beginning of this story. Of this has to be at night, and despite the fact that this is a stormy evening and it's dangerous, and all of that kind of stuff, they had to do whatever they could try to do. Besides Carney.
Well, I was reflecting on what you said about the kids, the next generation, carry nothing of the history themselves. It seems that they have no need for a Messiah. Probably find the whole idea incomprehensible.
So that was part of that, give and take. Yeah. When the old timers, Lady Hadassah and Aronchik, who's a little bit older than them, who's a survivor from Europe, they have these old-fashioned dreams. They have these old-fashioned ways of thinking about the future and the past, and they're being dismissed by these strong, macho. Even the young women are macho. In this, the pioneer. Yes. Image of the new Israel and the new Jew. And this was very exciting in many, many ways. But there's a little bit of a touch in this story of what's missing, right? If not for Lady Hadassah mentioning the past, and if not for Aronchik giving a religious garb to a hope for the future, they would be bereft of those kinds of traditional imagery, and they would just be, involved with their own sense of excitement, but without the context that came with it. There's a little bit of a hint about that as well in the story. Mm-hmm. You have Ben Aryeh. Ben Aryeh means son of a lion.
All right.
Believe me, that's not his original name. But he's called Ben Aryeh, and in fact, that was one of the things that happened in Israel. If you wanted to be a religious, not a religious, if you wanted to be an Israeli institutional leader, meaning if you wanted to be part of the political world, if you wanted to be part of the government, if you wanted to be part of an agency that was working with the government, you were expected to change your name. So if your name was Green, then you changed it to Ben Gurion, right? So, which was the name of one of the resistors to the Roman conquest at the time of the Second Temple. So all these names were taken. You have Yitzchak Shamir. His name wasn't Shamir. The truth is, I don't remember what his name was, but that's Ehud Barak. His name wasn't Barak. Barak is a name that he took from the Bible, not him, probably his parents, mm-hmm. biblicize and Hebraize his identity. So think about how much we sometimes think about keeping a family name. And especially women have to struggle with this, with the old-fashioned way that we always used to make it about who takes whose name and so on. But this was this willing relinquishing of all of those names for the sake of a new reality, for the sake of a new, society. In the Ben Aryeh, in the story, he says at one point, he says, and we'll show them that this land truly belongs to us. We are the ones who this land belongs to, right? So, of course, you needed something like that to be able to fight for establishing Israel. But now, fast forward, unfortunately, 75 years almost, certainly from when this is happening, right before the state is declared, and you have on the far right or on the right itself in Israel, we are the only ones who are the owners of this land. Nobody else has a right to even be here. If you don't like it, pack up your bags and leave, and we'll even make it uncomfortable enough for you to want to leave. This is what's happening today, unfortunately, within Israeli politics.
Yeah.
And this was Bibi Netanyahu's decision to, in order to try to stay in power, to take very, very extremist, racist Israeli groups and use them as allies so that he could try to get a majority in the election and in the coalition that he needs to create to run a government. So there's these little hints here that are prophetic in many ways to the kinds of problems and the kinds of questions that Israeli society confronts. I think I've told this story before, but I went to Israel for the first time for my bar mitzvah.
Wow.
And my parents couldn't afford to go, but they wanted me to have my bar mitzvah in Israel. So I went, my birthday's in the summer, so I went to an Israeli summer camp. To a summer camp in Israel run by, a Zionist group. And I met my Israeli relatives, and I was preparing for my bar mitzvah, and I would put on tefillin in the morning for the month before my bar mitzvah. And I was staying over at my Israeli cousins, and it was, shortly before my bar mitzvah. And that morning, they were wonderful, and they are my family, to this very day. Though that whole generation has passed away, since then. But I was putting on my tefillin in the morning, and one of my second, third, 15th removed cousins, sees me on the porch, on the balcony with my tefillin, and she goes, "What's that?" She goes, "What is that?" She was an Israeli, wonderful family. She had no concept of that Jewish practice. So the idea that this kind of heritage is unnecessary. It's a long way back to the comment that you were saying, Carney, before. They didn't feel that this was like excess baggage. Throw it away, get rid of it. We don't need it. We're marching, fast forward into the future, and we've got what we need. We've got the energy, we've got the creativity, we've got the courage, and we're gonna make a new life. And enough with this pathetic kind of suffering stuff. So and of course, what does Ben Aryeh say to his acolytes, to his followers? He says to them, don't argue with that religious guy tonight. We don't need to have arguments tonight. We have a job to do. He has a fantasy about a Messiah coming. Leave him alone. We don't, when we have one of our, gatherings, our youth group gatherings, we can have a good fight and, argue with him about what an old-fashioned, thinker he is. Tonight, go easy on him. Tolerate his religious imagery. Even though it's a bunch of baloney, right? So that's part of the story also. There's a lot of subtle stuff going on here. Just on the one hand, it's a kind of a very, sentimental fairy tale-y kind of story, but it's got these little touches in it. I want to say for Shalom Ash, in terms of immigrants and so on, Hadassah, he was one of the founders of the Joint. So the Joint Distribution Committee was about Jewish refugees from the pogroms and so on. It started from the First World War. And he was one of the founders. He was concerned all the time about Jewish suffering and about people that were being displaced, who were losing their homes, who were traveling here, traveling there. So he knew of what he was talking when he talks about this kind of desperate effort for people to try to find a home for themselves, and the good-hearted people who are putting their own lives on the line to save them and to help them. Yeah. Anything else? Anybody else have stuff to bring up now?
It's interesting that when they were talking about history and the generation, the Sabras didn't know history, and the people that had gone previously, I thought of Passover and when the Hebrews became slaves in Egypt because people did not know of Joseph. And it's very interesting because if you don't know history, you can stumble and make mistakes or do something nish kosher because you don't know the history of what transpired and why things happened the way they did.
Right. But that brings up the question of whose history are you know and whose history don't you know? When Pharaoh doesn't know Joseph,
Right.
so yes, there's a key part of his own history that he's denying, but he's still thinking about this other person who was somewhat of a stranger, to his people. But when your own people don't know Joseph, that's a whole other, loss, right? It's one thing. Why don't the other nations know about everything that the Jewish people have done for the good of France and Germany and England and Morocco and blah, blah, blah. But it's another thing when the Jews don't know what the Jews did. So, there's a different kind of question of history. And we're thinking about historical questions in this country too.
Sure.
The whole challenge, the 1619, 1617, 1619,
1619, yeah.
Right, 1619 project, which is saying, America, wake up. There's this whole history that you've been ignoring and denying. You are the pharaohs who refuse to know about your own history, but your own history. Forget about, you think about that it's not connected to you. This is what you've done. This is your experience. And you're not telling the story to your children. You're not telling the story to yourself. So it's time to start waking up and recognizing that history. You're right. If you don't remember your history, you're going to do things that are not kosher. You're going to do things that are not honoring another human being. Yeah, Carney.
This is a bit of an excursion, but it brought to mind, I just finished watching all 6 seasons of this magnificent French series, The French Village, which
I heard about it.
Takes this invented French village that's through the entire war from the beginning to the end. It's placed near the border of Vichy, France. And so there's a subplot, of course, a lot that involves the fate of the Jews and the back and forths and all the terrible political compromises and the rest. And anyway, at the end, there are two of these Jews who managed somehow to escape both the German occupiers.
You're giving away the end? You're giving away the end of the
whole... well, no, I'm not going to get, this isn't much of a spoiler.
Okay.
There's an awful lot of characters, an awful lot of plot. Anyway, where I was getting with that is at the end, these two man and woman find their way together and go to Israel because there's nothing left for them in France. Not because they have any particular affinity for being Jewish even, or neither of them are particularly religious, but what have they got left? And
right.
So it ends with a scene where they have joined the Jewish groups that are still fighting. in the same period right after the war, and it ends with them in a truck convoy to resupply some part of the resistance army, and they're ambushed and killed by Arabs. And but what interested me is that the clash of cultures among the Jews. There are some in the truck convoy who are younger, sort of sabras, and then the newcomers, and they have, I couldn't quite pick it up in the subtitles because they're subtitling like 3 or 4 languages, but they're saying they're trying to teach the newcomers from France some useful Hebrew phrases, and they want to say, what do we have to learn this Hebrew stuff for? You know, we already know 3 languages. It's just going to make us sound like Arabs. I remember how striking that was, that as you say, the Sabras had moved on. I thought they said, well, this is how it is now, you know, get used to it.
Right. One of the things that happened in the land of Israel in during all of these decades leading up to the establishment of the state is something that Shalom Ash would have been very, very aware of: the war against Yiddish.
Yeah.
Right, to establish Hebrew as the language of the nation. It meant really, really supporting that and really discouraging the use of Yiddish and not making Yiddish an official language, and saying, forget it. That's the old ways. That's the stuff we want to forget about. The New Deal is only through Hebrew. So Shalom Ash was a very, very successful Yiddish writer.
Could it be that because Yiddish is so intertwined with German, that they wanted to do away with that?
No, it was before even the Second World War. It was about the exile. Now, the truth of the matter is that Yiddish was only for the Ashkenazim, and only for some of the Ashkenazim. Not every Ashkenazi Jew, not every European Jew spoke Yiddish.
Yeah.
But Yiddish still was, a precious legacy of Jewish history and experience. I mean, none of the Middle Eastern Jews spoke Yiddish, so Yiddish wasn't like the universal language. Hebrew had the standing of being the one shared language of every Jew all over the world.
The lingua franca.
Right, but that doesn't necessarily mean that Yiddish was nothing. But that was their point was, no, it's the diaspora, it's the weak suffering Jew that's Yiddish. Yiddish is not the high class language we want.
Without Yiddish, we wouldn't have had the Yiddish theater, and so much came out of the Yiddish theater in New York. So
and that's why Habima was saying, we don't need Yiddish theater, we're going to have Hebrew theater. Right, so that was the idea. That was, what the impetus was. Let's create a full-fledged culture based on Hebrew for, in terms of everything: theater and the arts and books and songs and newspapers and speaking on the street. So that was the big effort, and it was a miraculous, heroic effort. Hebrew was brought back to life as a daily language after 2,000 years. So that's one of the amazing accomplishments of Israel. All right, we're going to call it a day for now. I want to wish everyone a good week, and as I said, we're observing Yom HaAtzmaut. I have, as I've sort of a little bit indicated, very mixed feelings about where Israel is today. But it is a miracle, and these stories that were told once upon a time are still worth remembering.
Yes.
Be well.
We need more stories.
You too.
Thank you.
Thank